Hey everybody, welcome back to Dungeon Brew, where today we are going to be delving into quests, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about open-ended quests and what that means. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Alright, so we're going to be jumping into quest building today, and the first actual, video that's going to just talk about quests in specificity. So we're going to talk today about quests. We're going to talk about open-ended quests. And I think it's going to be useful probably to get started with what a quest actually is. Because I think it's kind of a word that gets thrown around in RPGs, TTRPGs. You always have a quest log or something like that if you're playing MMORPGs or other games of that ilk. But for our purposes, what we're wanting to call a quest is we're wanting to talk about a task or an objective that the DM is presenting to the party that he's wanting them to complete. For you, Joshua, I'm just going to kind of kick things over to you so that you can talk a little bit more about questing and open-ended quests before we get into some more specifics.
Yeah, so I know for myself, and this is just because I spent a lot of time playing 3.5, I sometimes still call quests adventures, so I'll apologize to anybody if I start using the language interchangeably in this video or throughout this series. It's kind of hardwired into my brain that I think about it that way, because I was always searching for adventures in 3.5 and looking for them. But there is a set, probably, difference for a lot of gamers these days on the difference between an adventure and a quest. But when I'm thinking about quests, and especially open-ended quests, that usually means that myself as a DM behind the scenes don't have a conclusion in mind for the quest that I'm developing. I have an idea of where I would like to lead the party, but the conclusion or even the climax of this potential quest that I'm sending them on hasn't been decided because it's determined on their response or their actions or choices that they make along the way, and I can't necessarily determine what that might be. And so when I'm talking about an open-ended quest, I'm talking about something that I kind of have the first or second part or an idea kind of put together on what I'm developing for the adventuring party to go and explore or engage with, but I don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Right, so it's kind of like putting out your bait, seeing if you're going to hook any party members into being interested in the quest. But the quest itself is not ready. You might have part of it built out. You might have bits and pieces here and there, but the quest itself is still kind of open in the sense that if they were to pursue it directly, you would probably be caught on your heels. And in other cases, sometimes what I'll do is I actually have a good idea, a good chunk of the quest actually built out, but there are specific turning points in that quest where they get to a certain point, they have to make a decision, and depending on that decision, it could go several ways, and I kind of leave that open until I know which direction the party is intending to go, simply because it would be too time-consuming, really, to try and build out all of those avenues too early on in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what really it comes down to when we're talking about open-ended quests, because you and I have both done before. We've built out these huge, complex adventures for the party to go on, for them to explore all these things and do all these things, and the party just walks right by the dungeon or walks right by the NPC or doesn't fucking do what they're supposed to do that I was setting them up to go and engage with the world around me. And it gets really frustrating sometimes as a DM when you see your party just kind of completely tunnel vision past what it is that you've created. And so it's, for me, in developing quests, I kind of go through the same steps with an open-ended one. Like, I have an idea of the location or the setting. I set up some background information. Mm-hmm. I create some NPCs in that area. Like you mentioned, I try to create some really interesting hooks that are going to be meaningful for the party or are in alignment with their character motivations in hopes that they'll possibly go and engage in those pieces. And I might kind of build out the first act of the quest. Something that's, intriguing with a monster, some lore that's being thrown around or is known in the region, maybe some rumors that are going about for the party to go investigate and find things out about, or even a challenge that they're going to have to face. But I don't really take it beyond those steps. I just kind of give some of those initial pieces to see whether or not they're going to engage with it.
Yeah, and that's I mean that obviously it's a conversation we've had, so it's something very similar to what I do. In terms of quest building, one of the things that I'll do is I just make sure that I'm careful about ensuring that I do have some idea for what information is important, where that information is located, and making sure that the party isn't able to just skip by stuff. There's a tendency for a group of players to get overexcited and ignore a room that you intended them to go into, or ignore evidence that you had left basically in plain view, or anything else like that. So when you're talking about trying to get a quest noticed or available to the party, it's a good idea and to have multiple ways for that quest to be accessed, right? So if they're going around town and they go into the only tavern there or whatever, and they just basically go in and say, oh, we're going to sleep for the night and we're not going to, engage with anybody in the common room or do anything else. And you're like, man, that's where they were going to get the quest to start discovering the secret of the lumber mill that's down the road, and they completely ignored it and decided that they weren't going to do it, or didn't even visit the tavern. Whatever the reason, you have to have other ways of getting that quest or getting that information to the party. And it's better for you if you can pre-plan those things. If you can have access to other avenues to inform the players of things that are going on in the community, or things that are accessible in terms of getting that quest onto their radar.
It's interesting because you and I talked a little bit before this video, and I was like, I think it's really important to build contingencies, but I'm not really good at building them. Like, I'm more likely to go by the seat of my pants and try to interweave some of the stuff the characters have missed later on in the game so they get that same information. Right. But even after saying that, I'm thinking back on my notes that I've been doing for the last year for certain games, and I do have my notes set up that if the characters came across this information via A, this is what happens. If they came across it via B, this is what happens. So I do have some things that are built in that are due to contingencies and where the characters get information. But that can be challenging sometimes too. Is there a better way that you handle that?
I usually handle information in terms of like degrees of success or degrees of awareness for the party. So I like to give them bits and pieces. So I don't generally have all of the information. I don't put all of my eggs in one basket, right? So when it comes to information, when it comes to either giving them a quest or giving them information necessary to complete a quest, investigations, discoveries, all those things, I like to play an Easter egg hunt, and I spread my eggs out as far as I can and divvy up that information. And so what will happen is that the party may come across one of those eggs, one little bit of information. They may not recognize its importance. They may not know what it's for. But a lot of times it will stick in one player's mind. And if it doesn't, it's fine because I have other eggs out there. So I have one bit of information that the party has come across or they ignored or they forgot. And then eventually they'll come across another piece and then another piece. And eventually they'll have enough pieces to where they'll either be able to construct enough to go seek out the quest directly if it's interesting to them, or it's enough information to where they just kind of have an idea of what it is that they're supposed to be pursuing directly. So if I can get them interested enough in it, then they'll either, or if I can get them aware of it, they're either going to voice an interest in it, in which case they're going to seek out information, or they're going to get enough information to where they know that they're not interested in it and my hook has failed, at which point I know that I don't need to build anything more for the quest. But for me, it feels like a more natural approach to the way that you come across information. You might have an individual in the bar say something about the lumber mill, but they don't have the complete picture. They only know that something was going on there. And then you come across the merchant, and the merchant says, yeah, I've heard this thing about these ghosts and this girl who died and blah, blah, blah. He doesn't know anything about the lumber mill. He doesn't know anything else other than that. But for a discerning party, if there's enough kind of connective tissue between those two bits of information, they might be able to link them and then go, oh, this is something we want to look into. Especially if you can start getting other little bits of information that also inform that bigger picture, to really make it feel like the party has discovered something And that is oftentimes a very good hook for a party, because if they feel like they have had an active hand in actually constructing enough of a picture to be able to create a quest, because that's what it feels like. It feels like they're creating their own quest. They're more likely to pursue it in a lot of instances.
Yeah, I really like that language, because I do sometimes think of open quest as like a choose your own adventure quest. Not that I don't have some sort of sense of like where it's going to go. Like I might have some idea. I just don't know for certain on how that's going to happen. I know later in the series we're going to be talking about side quests as well as closed-ended quests. But when I think of open-ended quests, oftentimes they're actually part of the larger picture, the larger campaign, or the larger story. And it really has a lot to do with what the characters choose in directing that trajectory throughout the storyline to really make it come to life for them.
Right.
Do you have a specific place you put these? Or, I mean, I know that sometimes open-ended quests can also be, of course, side quests.
Right.
Depending on whether or not the party shows interest. But do you find yourself frequently building open-ended quests as part of the larger storyline and having it being based on the character's response?
So I very rarely, and Cast Down from Haven is very much an exception. I very rarely, when I start campaign building, have a specific BBEG for the party to pursue or world-ending scenario that they need to resolve. I very rarely do those things. What ends up being the main quest is usually the thing that the party is most interested in, and that is almost always open-ended. Because when I start creating the world, I start them out, and I've talked about this before, I start them out in a very kind of limited area where they get to explore a community. I get a sense of the party, get a sense of their interests, their passions, their motivations, and from there, things start to build outwards. So I will have some primary conflicts that I'll put in that area, and if there's enough interest from the party in the conflicts that are going on there, I will build that conflict out. I will allow it to expand, and I will allow it to inform not only that specific town, but then the region, and then I'll take it out and I'll build it out into the world as a whole. I very rarely come in with the intention of saying they have to go defeat Sauron because that's the main villain in the story that I've created and they need to hunt him down. Because for me as a player, I don't find that particularly engaging. And as a DM, I find it really boring to actually try and put together, because then it just feels like I already have, the big bad evil guy. He's over here. You just need to go kill him. And that doesn't seem like a bunch of fun to me. I want the party to naturally discover what's in the world, and for them to naturally discover what's in the world, I have to naturally kind of build it out as they're engaging with things that they come across.
Yeah, I know we don't want to spend all day talking about this topic, but I think that one thing that is important to highlight when talking about open-ended quests is the challenges that come in building them as a DM. Because some of the things that you're talking about, it requires being attentive to your party, understanding their motivations, seeing where their interests are, even sometimes reading nonverbals or listening to inflections in their voice and how they respond to things so you know where to build out, and constantly being creative in the way that you're approaching quest building and building on little pieces onto it at a time that are going to meet the needs of your party. It's not like it's, go get this and bring it back, or come into the city and stop the slave trade, which feels very heavy-handed and just telling your party exactly what to do. You are having to be attentive and engaging with your party through every session so that you are prepared to continue the next session wherever the chapter ended last time. Like, it is a challenge. It does take a little bit more from the DM to be able to do this consistently.
Yeah, and it's something that I've noticed that you do as a DM when I play in your games. The Nordic campaign, you may have some of the quests built out beforehand, but the way that we discover them is natural. It feels like we're entering into a community. It feels like events are unfolding, and then we're getting information, and that information informs what we want to do. And then we, generally speaking, in that campaign, we had a bunch of options. We were like, can we go pursue the Volsung? Can we go pursue this? Can we go pursue that? And then we have to make a decision on what we think is the most important. For me as a player, that's engaging, because it feels like there are real stakes, there are real issues with the way that we make our decisions. Yeah. It's not engaging when you walk in and there's a quest board And the quest board has 6 quests, and every time that you knock off one quest, another quest appears, and you get that sense of, like, I'm just kind of going through and doing a task list, which is not the same thing. And I think that differentiation is very important when it comes to trying to make a world that feels realistic and make quests that feel natural to that world.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to say here at the end of this video, before we dive into closed-ended quests in our next one, is that there is a place and a time for closed-ended quests. They do have a necessary place within gameplay for a lot of players, and there are some players that do like the grindy aspect of a quest board where they want a game where they're just hacking and slashing and going through their task list. And if you know your party well and you know the people around your table well and they want that, that's great to build that way. But for those that want that open-ended experience, hopefully this video is giving you some tips on how to approach that. That's not going to be overwhelming as a DM.
I have nothing else to add. That's a great final point, and I'm glad that you brought that up.
All right, we'll see you guys all next time.
Jon and Josh.